web blaster. The power is in your hands. Popped Extendi sold separately. And now the movie's new action figures collection. Fully posable. You can get them all. Spider-Man. Each sold separately.
What you just witnessed was the tipping point that made me an action figure collector and didn't even realize it yet. Cut to today, and I'm out of space and money, but at least I have a banger of a McFarlane and Marvel Legends collection, mostly comprised of my two favorite heroes of all time, Spider-Man and Batman. Such a chunky collection, in fact, that I personally feel like I can make somewhat of an educated comparison between the two companies that helm both characters. McFarlane Toys versus Marvel Legends. Who comes out on top in the ultimate comparison? Sam Raimi's 2002 take on Spider-Man ushered in Toy Biz's opportunity to give us a solid series of 6-inch figures from the newly formed Marvel Legends, which was actually born that same year, and out of all of them, it was the wrestler suit Spider-Man that I gravitated to the most, drawn in by its sick transforming costume gimmick. My perspective begins in 2002 with those Raimi movie figures, which came in rather sturdy body molds that have held up even to this day. Despite the case with the melted rubber of my wrestler suit Spidey, as I've documented in a separate video, my Tobey Maguire figure underneath is still retaining a good amount of paint and plastic for its release from 20 years ago. Sure, the colors have slightly faded, but hell, colors fade from pretty much our own faces, so who are we to judge? Others online have testified having their own figures still being really well preserved since their release in the early to mid 2000s, showing very little chipping and wear and tear. Of course, like I mentioned before, an awful lot of this is due to maintenance and upkeep depending on the collector, so an awful lot of that mileage may vary. It should also be worth noting that these really well-built figures are produced by Toy Biz, and they kind of knew what they were doing. Hell, to this day, my favorite figure out of that entire era that I've ever owned is the Zipline Spidey from the Spider-Man 2 wave that came with a magnetic billboard, which boasts a great deal of quality, paint, detail, and articulation, and is not even the most premium Spidey out of that wave. That would technically be the superposable variant, which goes for a little human arm and a leg these days online. Toy Biz hit it out of the park with the first two Raimi films, much like he did as a director of those movies, so it only makes sense for said quality to match. So enter Spider-Man 3, and enter Hasbro in 2007 when they took up the licensing duties for Spider-Man 3 movie figures. Those figures were scaled down to 5.5 inches, and despite having modest enough paint to still hold up to this day, the actual choices of color and design remain questionable, as Venom is pretty much a bright purple, Black Suited Spidey is more of a platinum silver than anything else, and New Goblin looks like a Happy Meal toy. The quality of those toys felt incredibly off too, feeling kind of flimsy in hand and very difficult to pose. Lackluster accessories like Harry's glider and Venom's rubbery web accessory didn't help either. The following year, Hasbro took a bit of a second swing at the Spider-Man 3 characters with a new 6-inch wave, but by that time, I had made the difficult choice to prioritize my allowance, yes, I had allowance at the time, towards Transformer figures, which were kind of at their peak with their own movie tie-ins in 2009 and 2007 respectively. To this day, the Movie Master Leader Class Optimus Prime is one of my holy grails. Eventually, those figures would also diminish in scale, quality, and I just didn't see the appeal anymore. Plus, I was running out of money and space and decided to take an indefinite hiatus from collecting figures altogether through the bulk of the 2010s. Seeking a new hobby outside of gaming and content creation during the onset of the pandemic, I found my respite in McFarlane's DC Multiverse Batman figures. The price was reasonable, the sculpt looked impressive, and the overall packaged deal alluring. One employee discounted figure led to another, and before I knew it, I had a bit of a problem. A problem I'd exploit for content on the channel. I know, McFarlane Toys was technically created in 1994, around the time that he created Spawn, and has been making toys and statues ever since. But let's be real, 2020, after the licensing of DC in 2018, is really when the brand took off to where it is today, especially with the DC Multiverse, and what got me into collecting figures from them in the first place. 2022, especially in the latter half of that year, made me put things into perspective, not only because of the amount of products and waves McFarlane dropped for the different licenses they own, but how much competition they faced with the likes of Marvel Legends, who hit the ground running with a plethora of new figures as well, from their retro card line and their honor to Spider-Man's 60th anniversary, new X-Men and Fantastic Four figures, retail exclusives, and of course, movie and television tie-in waves with the likes of Wakanda Forever, Multiverse of Madness, and Disney Plus shows. We hit a bit of a critical mass as far as collectibles and action figures from both of these companies this past season, and it made toy hunting and collecting a bit exhausting, but also really exhilarating as far as that thrill of the hunt. And then subsequently, it kind of gave me all of the necessary materials and influence and motivation to want to make this comparison video. And mind you, this is going to be a comparison video from one very scrawny collector's point of view and my view altogether. So just keep that in mind as we go forward here. Let's get started. Close your eyes and imagine with me. You're entering a Toys R Us circa 2004 and you go to the aisle specifically for 6-inch collectible figures. What is the first thing you see? Oh, that goddamn giraffe. Oh, and the box. The boxes for action figures. They have this sort of universal language to collectors once you see them up on the shelf or in the aisle, and they kind of speak to everybody that has an affinity for these heroes and for these companies, and I feel like there's enough of a contrasting perspective between the two, for better or for worse, that needs to be addressed here in this comparison. Being the new, relatively quote-unquote new kid on the block, as I mentioned, McFarlane Toys' packaging for their DC Multiverse line has mostly stayed consistent since their upswing with the DC Multiverse line in 2020, and as such have settled on a packaging design that is simple and recognizable with a black and white rectangular box, a window wide enough to see the figure, a blue comic book onomatopoeia stencil design on the back, shots of either the figure or the character on the back, along with portraits of the other figures in the wave at the bottom. Of course, we can't forget the branding of the company around the box, Batman as a property with its logos, and the usual legal notes all around. The only real problem so far, beyond the inconsistent placement of the tie-in logos on the sides, but that's just me talking, is that there's no real stamp of uniqueness with McFarlane. It is in fact the same box over and over and over. Marvel Legends is a bit more on the complicated side. Unlike McFarlane, they probably had the most switches when it came to art style and definitive look to their packaging, often switching from time to time over the years, even way back when I was collecting those Raimi figures, so you can't necessarily knock Marvel Legends for not being diverse. Whether it be for movie tie-ins, special card designs, retail exclusives, and so much more, the boxes for Marvel Legends could never be pinned down. Sometimes it would be in a generic box, other times it would be in a bubble packaging with strange curvature, and sometimes it would just be downright crazy. For now, I'm going to focus a little bit more on some of the more recent boxes that stuck for the majority of their releases, starting with the rounded and trapezoidal windowed box. This was the box most collectors and parents of shrieking kids would see down the Target aisle most recently when hunting Marvel Legends. It's pretty straightforward with the Marvel Legends at the top, name of the character and property they're from at the bottom, and a very wide window to showcase the figure in the middle along with its accessories, front and center. Some beautiful art on the back and the sides with a brief bio and portraits of the rest of the wave at the bottom towards the back card. It's simple but very direct. There was also that period throughout 2021 in which Marvel Legends was adapting the retro card series, in which pretty much we have a very standard form of packaging with the bubble plastic, and then on the back of the card is pretty much a homage to the classic look of the animated series, using an awful lot of bright colors, stencils, and designs. And though it comes with a slight negative connotation of those screaming little brats and complacent parents buying that for them because they need to shut them up, at least that's my own personal experience walking down Target aisles, collectors in general were pretty content with this style of packaging. So it only makes sense for them to change it. Enter the new windowless packaging. It retains a more narrow yet girthier trapezoid shape, and I admit I used to stand this new style of box when it was first revealed, mainly because of the uniformity of the graphical aesthetic, artwork, logo placement throughout, mainly for the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man Wave, and plastic-free packaging that doesn't need a cutting tool. Mainly because McFarlane would often end up breaking some of my X-Acto knives to try to get through some of those plastics. Also, McFarlane, guys, I love you, but can we stop with this? You see this right here, the plastic insert? This little slit right here where you put the capes in? Can we stop this? Alright, it's legitimately ruining some of the capes for the majority of the Batman figures that you guys produce, and there's gotta be some kind of alternate way to pack the figure to make sure that it's all secure while at the same time not causing any damage to the capes, because this part right here, not only is it giving me some finger cuts, but it's also damaging the capes by simply just pulling him out of the plastic. This needs to be fixed ASAP. But over time, I did begin to draw fears of getting a figure swap or defective figure due to not being able to see the damn thing prior to purchasing. Not long after, many other collectors started reporting their own experiences on Reddit and Twitter of figure swaps or defunct figures, and out of that fear coming to fruition, it kinda convinced me to switch sides on the matter as well. Overall, McFarlane keeps it kinda simple and clean, yes, Kingdom Hearts reference there, with their DC Multiverse line, and they only really get creative when it comes to their first party stuff like Dragons or the Spawn series. But it makes purchases a little simpler on you as the collector because you know what you're getting, you see it all inside and everything that's included, and also the bold labeling here on the side makes it very easy to sift through pegs and find out exactly what it is that you're looking for, regardless of where you're at, whether it be Target, Walmart, or even a vendor at a collectible trade show. Now, it's time to get hard. Plastic hard. Time to mold it down to the technicals of each company's figures. Marvel Legends deals in the 6-inch scale, while McFarlane vies for 7-inch high figures. Articulation varies on Marvel Legends depending on the used body sculpt, while McFarlane Toys constantly boasts about how all of their DC Multiverse figures feature 22 points of articulation. There's a certain level of expectations for accessories for both, but generally we can always kind of expect an alternate set of hands for Marvel Legends, while McFarlane, having a hand in the sports collectible industry, guarantees a trading card and a pegged base with their products. Both companies also throw in the added treat of Build-A-Figure waves. For Marvel Legends, the prices usually kind of fluctuate depending on how much plastic and which character essentially goes with what piece, whereas McFarlane Toys almost always goes for the $24.99 price tag. And though it's nothing exactly new for toy companies, harkening back to probably the 80s and 90s, naturally both companies are going to have their own exclusives. McFarlane Toys has this neat little gold label attached to their boxes that points out which one is going to be a retailer exclusive, whether it be through Amazon, Target, Walmart, or even their own personal McFarlane Toy store website, whereas Marvel Legends, they just kind of pick and choose a little bit who's gonna have what, and such is the case with the Doc Ock and Silk 2-pack here, which ended up being a Amazon exclusive, but otherwise you really wouldn't be able to tell via any kind of special labeling, which is where I kind of like a little bit of the clean gold label look that you have right here in the corner for the McFarlane Toys boxes. If we are to look at things objectively for a second, the larger scale for McFarlane's makes it a little easier for designers to add more detail and paint decals. Marvel Legends, on the other hand, has the smaller industry standard 6-inch scale, but at least it helps with space management and uniformity. At this point, things could get a little subjective and down a slippery slope when discussing which characters deserve which accessories or which scale, because people are going to have different tastes and they're going to like different characters, and because of that, they're going to decide and kind of argue which character deserves such an accolade. And an awful lot of those details are going to rest on the eye of the beholder, so being that this is my comparison on my channel, I'm going to have to see this from the approach of the two characters that I have the greatest affinity for coming from these two different companies. Of course, I am talking about Batman and Spider-Man. Let's address the money-making elephants in the room. Batman versus Spider-Man. Arguably the most produced characters from each company respectively. Any way you sculpt it, it's kind of easy how certain collectors that aren't massive fans of these characters can see how saturated the market is with these heroes. Being as this is a channel solely catered to what happens to be my favorite characters out of Marvel and DC respectively, I personally don't have that much of a quarrel with the output of Spideys and Batmans that we get. Still, I can understand the plea for more diversity amongst the roster of Marvel and DC heroes and villains, especially those that haven't gotten the plastic spotlight on them. With this channel being mostly covering Spider-Man and Batman, this was a very busy season during the latter half of 2022 when both McFarlane Toys and Marvel Legends were just constantly dropping things almost every other week. And seeing as the momentum of the channel was starting to take off, I felt the need to have to collect as many of these figures that pertain to Spider-Man and Batman as much as possible, cover them, review them, publish the material, and hopefully add a few of these entries into my own personal collection from just a collective point of view. Regardless, I must reiterate, because of that, this is going to be my take on these Spider-Man and Batman figures as far as the comparison moving forward. Taking the strengths and skills from over 20 years of statue and collectible making experience, McFarlane overall delivers with the quality in their figures, really showcasing on paint, detail, etchings, and of course articulation, one of which they boast about a lot on the boxes. Those exact moving joints often vary from character to character, but they almost always hit the famous 22 points. Adding the extra inch from the industry standard scale to 7 inches allows a lot of these factors to shine, especially detail and paint. There's also this feel that almost all of their figures have in the plastic that feels weighted in quality, never making me feel like it should cost more or less. Sadly, my praise for the quality cannot be applied to pretty much any wave or line that is tied to a movie or a game. It seems like McFarlane Toys has a bit of an obligation to get these figures out by a specific time, especially so that it can be riding the hype of whatever movie or game it's pretty much being tied to, and as such I feel like a little bit of that plastic quality, paint decals, and pretty much all the attributes of these figures suffers for it. Ever so often there'd be some outliers that went against this that actually proved to be pretty successful sculpts, such as a majority of the Black Adam figures that have really good likenesses to some of the actors that were in that movie, specifically The Rock. But then you have poor Colin Farrell as the Penguin from the Batman movie line, and then don't get me started on pretty much half of all of the Gotham Knights figures with terrible QC's issues and paint decals and sculpting. Similar to the actual process of developing a video game, it seems like McFarlane Toys, as long as they're not rushed, they could put out quality items. But if they're under some kind of crunch because WB or some other company says they need to put out these figures in time, then pretty much no one comes out a winner at the end of the day. Marvel Legends has often been criticized for repainting certain molds over and over and over and over again, mainly for Spidey and whichever comic book hero or villain performs best right under him. Often this is a result of tooling costs and whether there's enough money for a new mold in the budget. Spectre Creative over on YouTube made an insightful video discussing the concept, and I highly recommend that you check it out. The ethical notion of Hasbro's repaints and feel for their figures right out of the box is a debate that has run for years and doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. McFarlane doesn't seem to lean on repaints as much, or at the very least, for now. 2023 has seen the reuse of the Hush Batman mold for 2 other variants, and only time and financial results, and again budget costs, will tell if there'll be more on the horizon. Another counter-argument I've constantly heard is David. Every single toy company in existence has reused body molds and pieces almost reoccurringly with several different action figures for even different characters. What's your point? And in that assessment, you are correct, but this also reminds me of a screenwriting paradigm that I kind of learned in film school, and a couple of my teachers also gave me this paradigm to think about, is that there are no original ideas. Even harkening back to the days of the 60s and 70s, there were no original ideas for movies and even television shows. There's only original ways to tell those ideas. And I feel like that could still somewhat apply to these toy companies reutilizing the body molds. Obviously there's going to be repaints, it just all falls down to the ethical ways of how to use these repaints that really kind of gives us a clearer picture of what these companies are all about. And that's the ethics of these two companies and whether or not the price justifies the ends of these figures being produced. There's also what I like to call the ooh factor. Nope, I'm still working on the title.
TM.
And it's a factor that revolves around that first initial unboxing of the figure. You pull it out, you feel it in hand, and you either go ooh in the most positive form or ooh in the negative, in the sense that maybe you might have some buyer's remorse. And I feel like there's more of a tendency to get the positive reaction of the ooh factor when it comes to McFarlane's, because often it feels like you're getting a brand new figure. And even if there are some reuses of certain arms or legs or particular body types, there's always some kind of new wrinkle to be added to it that feels brand new in hand. Whereas Marvel Legends, especially with their constant releases towards the latter half of 2022, it felt like I was buying the same figure over and over, and it was quite frankly starting to get old. That wow factor, that ooh factor was just wearing thin. Where I will have to be a little critical of McFarlane would have to be their efforts on clothing and costumes. Being that we're dealing with superheroes, capes are going to be a major factor, and a good amount have modest feeling capes, while others feel like they barely made it outside of mass production. Also, heroes and even villains need their own wonderful toys, and thus accessories are a major talking point amongst collectors, not just for Batman figures, but pretty much any kind of property-based action figure throughout. This is one area that McFarlane has waned in the past year, as some of the earlier Batman figures would almost always come with a batarang, a grapple, and interchangeable hands. Nowadays, some iterations of the Dark Knight don't get as lucky, while other characters whose name isn't Batman may come with jack squat. Marvel Legends always guarantees a web accessory for their Spidey figures, even if it's the same piece we've seen time and time again, and ever so often there is a gem of a set you wouldn't think Hasbro would throw in, such as my case with Spider-Man Noir's pistol and fedora absent alternate head from the Spider-Verse version. That same Noir figure also demonstrates the robustness of clothing sculpts in their figures, even if personally I would have wanted it to be sculpted in a different way, but the way that the coat and the sweater underneath is sculpted is actually pretty premium feeling. Yes, if you haven't already noticed, McFarlane is a bit blatant about his favoritism towards the Caped Crusader, more than almost any other DC character, and the bountiful, and I mean thick, amount of Batman figures he's produced in the past 3 years alone make that very crystal clear. However, he's not the only culprit here. Hasbro Marvel Legends has their own wall-crawling golden goose, and they didn't really waste any time in taking advantage, especially with Spidey's 60th anniversary in 2022. Most of the figures I personally collected out of these waves varied in quality and value. Iron Spider and the Renew Your Vows 2-pack hit the mark for me, while Future Foundation Spider-Man felt so cheap and kind of hollow that I ended up returning him and has since never bought him back. Others were kind of tossed somewhere in the middle, like Amazing Fantasy Spider-Man, who I kind of came around a little bit after some heavy consideration. It is also true that we must remember that each of these respective toy companies still have to answer to the rights holders of these characters. Hasbro must answer to Sony for the wall crawler, while some of the Batman's Rogue Gallery needs to be cleared by WB and DC as far as those controversial accessories are concerned. This would explain why McFarlane must resort to store site exclusives like the accessory packs to give characters their right weapons. This would also explain the influx of price hikes with certain Spider-Man figures from Marvel Legends, such as the recently announced Spider-Man 2 video game figure coming out in August of 2023. This was definitely the spark that ignited the fire among social media for a lot of talking points. How much is it too much, and what exactly is offered at the best value by either company? As we've seen, Marvel kind of picks and chooses prices of some of their figures in the past, while McFarlane has mostly remained unchanged at $20 for standard figures and $25 for Build-A-Figure editions and page punchers, always including that card and base regardless of whichever other accessories are included. Those recent page punchers as well as the DC Superpowers retro line have added a bit of collectability and variety of options for fans. But how long will that Arizona tea mentality that McFarlane has somewhat adapted truly last? Some of the early drops in 2023 saw some figures go up for roughly $2 to $3 extra on top of the usual price for certain retailers, notably Amazon and Target. There is some empathy to be found for fan channels such as Big Bad Toy Store because they have to account for being independent and counting for the flat rate shipping. But what about these major conglomerates sneaking in that little tax here and there, like Amazon having some McFarlane figures go for $22.99 now? The scary thought for collectors would be, when will the cost for collecting certain figures be just too damn high? Should collectors make their pleas be known to McFarlane and Marvel Legends before it's too late? Would any of them truly listen? Shortly after the pre-order for the pricey Marvel Spider-Man 2 figure went live, Dan Yun, one of the marketers over at Hasbro for Marvel Legends, put out a tweet saying, quote, "I totally understand and read all of the DMs and comments. I understand FR, or for real, as it's said in internet speak," end quote, along with a gif of Michael from The Office, insinuating that he has been receiving an amalgamation of reactions to the figure's price, to put it mildly. Most folks in the replies objectively defended him while also pointing out how inflated markets affect both Hasbro and consumers alike, prompting Dan to respond to these responders adequately and pretty nicely. The point here is how effective and surreal it is for one person that works for the company here in question, Hasbro, and takes time out of their day to address the fans who have legitimate concerns about a product they were thinking of getting. These days, that alone is a bit of a commodity. Ryan and Dwight over at Hasbro Marvel Legends do live streams often talking to folks on social media and even provide interviews for certain influencers such as Toy Bro and Boognice10. McFarlane Toys has accounts. Sure, there was that one time that Todd himself had an hour-long interview with Shartimus Prime to talk about DC Multiverse figures, but most of their pages on social media, from Twitter to Facebook and Instagram, come off as a bit automated and robotic, with seemingly scheduled posts just announcing pre-orders and linking out to retailers and product pages. Sure, they do a good job at letting people know when they can buy certain figures or order them ahead of time, but it never really feels like there's a human behind the account or their posts. It never feels like there's a form of cartilage between the heads at McFarlane Toys and their fans. At least not the way it appears to be over at Marvel Legends with the likes of Dan, Ryan, and Dwight. Though, playing devil's advocate, you can argue that maybe an awful lot of this automation for the social media accounts is due in part to having most of their employees work customer service, as they were handling a plethora of issues stemming from some of the waves that they released, from the Dark Knight Trilogy wave consisting of quality control problems to shipping delays for the early wave of the Nightfall Catwoman, Mr. Freeze, and Blue and Gray Hush Batman. At least the guys over at Hasbro, for better or worse, relay some form of communication, even with nasty situations like the Engine of Vengeance fiasco, or having their hands tied with certain projects because of what someone over at Hasbro tells them to say. For more context, check out Boognice10's interview, in which the way that some responses are worded and body language from the guys hint at that being the case. Will McFarlane ever hear their fans in this manner? Well, we certainly hope so. One long-winded debate for McFarlane Toys has been why alternate heads aren't included with their figures, especially when the default one either comes with the dreaded side eyes, which McFarlane has since retired, at least for the time being, or when they come with an ugly-ass expression, like this Aquaman. Seriously, what the f***? Other conversations have been the inclusion of more than one set of hands, oblivious paint mishaps like the black and gray Batman variant that came in the Hush 2-pack, and then the most obvious, how many Batmans do we really need, and will we ever get other characters like a comic-accurate Wonder Woman or Poison Ivy, and will they ever grace DC Multiverse shelves? Todd himself appears to be a cool guy from others' accounts, especially at conventions and other fan-based appearances, but one hopes he keeps a bit more of an open mind going forward. During the aforementioned interview with Shartimus Prime, Todd made a comment about not being able to put out a whole wave of female characters in the, quote, boys figures aisle, end quote, hinting at them not really selling well, or at least perceiving the notion that they're not going to sell well ahead of time. Meanwhile, the Wonder Woman figure from the Death Metal wave is personally my favorite out of that series. Take us content creators, for example. We often have to test and experiment different things to see what works on platforms. How will Todd know if Wonder Woman, Poison Ivy, and others wouldn't sell? At least try out with some kind of early concept version, and we kinda got that a little bit with the new Wonder Woman figure from the Shazam movie, spoilers by the way, and we did get some Harley Quinns in the past, and recently the Injustice 2 Supergirl got her own page puncher, so hopefully this is all signs of things to come. Both companies severely need some work. Despite being the more transparent and direct one out of the bunch, By comparison, the Marvel Legends guys still need the courage to present fans' concerns to the suits over at Hasbro, while McFarlane, as passionate and blunt he is about the brand, should try to be a bit more open-minded about what he can bring to the table for collectors, especially since he has more reign as far as building in-house and a speedy production table under his belt. So who ends up coming up top with the ultimate comparison between McFarlane Toys and Marvel Legends? Us. I know, it's a bit of a cop-out, I apologize, I know, and it was probably an answer you more or less may have seen coming, considering that as the years go on through, we're going to have these two companies rivaling each other because it's the ultimate battle between Marvel and DC. But here's why I have to switch the argument on over to making us the winners, because ultimately these two companies, because of the competition being bred amongst themselves, ultimately that will only lead to better products for us as collectors, especially if we're fans of both, because in case some of you may have not known, we can be fans of both. We don't necessarily have to decide and just go with DC or just go with Marvel. We can have our cake and eat it too, or collect it and put it up on the shelf. Where things get problematic is when either side decides to kind of just lose the plot as far as why it is that we got into this hobby in the first place, is because we love these things, we love these characters, and we love to at least hold on to a piece of our childhood as time kind of just erodes us away inevitably. And as dark as that might sound, this is one of the things that we are able to hold on to, much like musicians are able to hold on to some of the instruments they grew up with as children. And because of that, we must not lose sight of what makes this hobby special. And who's to say that McFarlane Toys and Marvel Legends aren't the only two that can have all the fun? This competition could also lead to other companies trying to step up their game. Super 7, NECA. And to me, the best example of this is pretty much everything that has to do with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I'm not exactly the biggest TMNT fan, but I am noticing that almost everybody, McFarlane Toys included, is trying to throw their hat into the TMNT game, or rather their pizza. And it's looking like there's going to be a variety of options for people who are huge fans of the Turtles coming up here in the next couple of years, because almost every toy company is going to be producing some sort of collectible figure. In fact, they're doing it as we speak with that Monster series and then a couple of other things that are being released slowly in retail stores. And so it's more of that, and hopefully leaning towards the licenses of Marvel and DC that will hopefully bring us some better products. But of course, as I mentioned here towards the end, we got to make sure that our voices are being heard and that those voices are not falling on deaf ears. Both companies need to do some work on different avenues of their respective businesses. Here's to hoping that maybe entering 2023 and even in years to come, we will get some awesome cool stuff coming from both companies, and nothing will deter us from loving this hobby even more. So much like Godzilla vs. Kong or Batman vs. Superman, there's never really going to be a definitive winner when it comes to these two comparisons, but now I leave it to you guys in the comment section below. Who is it? McFarlane Toys or Marvel Legends? And why? Simple as that. Let me know in the comment section below if you guys enjoyed this comparison / essay. I would greatly appreciate it if you guys hit the thumbs up button. If you didn't hit the thumbs down anyway, it lets me know in the algorithm of what I need to work on. And of course, if you guys have any other further opinions besides the question I asked, let me know in the comments. And for further McFarlane Toys and Marvel Legends content, check out the one that's showing up on screen right now, or simply just click into the channel, check out the content, and who knows, if you liked it enough, hit subscribe, and you guys will be notified when more goes live. Otherwise, I appreciate you for watching once again, and stay humble. See you later.